to our staff meeting, Dr. Stephanie Kerschbaum. She led our signature lecture for this week in the speaker series, Writing Centers and Access, yesterday. And she's joining us today to spend her afternoon with us, and we're really excited to have her. Stephanie, the virtual floor is all yours.
Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm okay, so I had kind of planned a little, I'd like to hear from some of you. And I feel like one of the things that happens in writing centers is that they're all very different. They've all got very different local and institutional contexts that are really important to the conversation that happen within them. So I had hoped to hear from everyone. I am seeing the number of folks in this meeting and that's not really feasible. So I will skip the first agenda item, and I will also mention, let me put the link back up in the chat. There is an agenda that I put together in the Google Doc, just largely text, but it should give you a sense of what's happening and where I imagine we might go in conversation together. But one of the things that I would actually really appreciate is if I could hear from a small number of you, maybe 10, if you want to kind of unmute, or if you want to be on video, I think while you're speaking, that would be great. I would love to virtually meet you. And just tell me something that you really like about working in the Writing Center at Michigan State, or something that you've learned recently that you found to be really valuable. And this will just help me get a sense of, what is this Writing Center context like? What are the kinds of things that are coming up for some of you? So if we can take a few minutes to do that, I would be really grateful.
I would say that something I really enjoy about working in the Writing Center is learning so much about different disciplines, different content. We have a lot of people who come to the Writing Center not just from one particular major or to work on composition assignments, but from all over business, science, etc. So that's what I really like about working at the Writing Center.
So the range of types of topics and papers and assignments, absolutely. What else?
Hi, I'm Julia. I'm a master's student and a graduate coordinator here. I would say that something that I particularly love about working in writing centers, and this writing center in particular, is getting to meet just such a range of fantastic individuals and work with them on sharing their stories and their ideas in a lot of unique and wonderful ways.
Thank you. So the people that you get to interact with regularly, I see that Allie had shared in the chat something I really enjoy about working in the Writing Center is the people that I get to meet. The individuals I work with, the individuals I have as clients are all interesting and wonderful people, and I appreciate getting to make those connections with everyone.
One thing I really appreciate about our Writing Center is that we do so much work that's not just confined to the Writing Center. We're very community engaged. We're involved off campus and cross institutionally. And I feel like that signifies one of our values, which is that writing is about community and collaboration, and that it doesn't just kind of happen here in a bubble. We're really always approaching our work from that extended and engaged standpoint. And I really admire that about this writing center.
Thinking about the mission and purpose of the writing center, that's something that's enacted through the kind of work that you get to do. I'd like to hear from a couple more people.
One thing that I really appreciate about our writing center is how much responsibility we're given as student consultants working here and with projects that we really personally care about. I've just, even as a grad student, getting to work on things with the accessibility committee has been really wonderful experience, and I've learned a lot.
Hi, I'm and going off of what Karen and EJ said, just the opportunities for engagement that we have within the community and within our campus community and beyond it. Just getting to do that work is really fulfilling.
It's a way to expand the connections and the network that you have. Wow, yes. Thank you. This was really helpful. I appreciate all of you, jumping in and sharing. Just giving me a little bit of a ground to meet a few of you. Let me continue with the agenda. And I also want to make a quick comment about the Google Doc agenda format that I like using. And one of the things that I like about working with Google Doc agenda is the possibility of taking notes collectively right in that document. Some people like to do this with comment bubbles next to the agenda item, but I've also created at the very bottom just a very simple table. So if there are topics that come up that are important to come back to, or that are ones that you want to remember, and there are action items connected to those topics, you can use that table to record some of that. So this is an invitation to all of you to use this document in a way that will be helpful for you to remember the conversation and to build from it. Once we're no longer in the staff meeting workshop space together. So I want to talk just a little bit about some of the things that came up yesterday in the talk, some of the things that I talked about in that talk. And if you were there yesterday and there were points in that talk that were really important or that stuck with you, I'd really love if you added those, if I don't mention them, because folks in this meeting, I realize not all of you may have been able to come yesterday, or just hearing what other people took away from it is really helpful. So I talked briefly about the concept of markers of difference from my first book, Toward a New Rhetoric of Difference. And that was really based on students talking to each other during small group peer review. And in developing that concept, I thought a lot about how people signaled who they were, how they signaled what they were, how they were positioning the people that they were talking to. And markers of difference are the rhetorical cues. Maybe they would name an identity, or maybe they would use a phrase that's meaningful, or they would use patterns of language that signaled to the people that they were talking to that they were part of a certain group or wanted to be perceived in a certain way. And as I continued to think about after publishing that book, I kept thinking about difference. I kept thinking about my own navigation in the world, right? Like how I was disclosing deafness or disclosing disability. And a lot of these disclosures were not about things that I said, right? Like it wasn't always like I stuck my hand up and said, hi, I'm deaf, but that people might see my hearing aid, or that they might hear my voice, or that I would behave in a certain way. Like maybe I wouldn't react to something, and they'd be surprised, like why is she not reacting, right? So I really wanted a way to kind of think about all of those forms of revealing or naming or pointing to disability that weren't just about talking, weren't just about words and discursive forms of marking. And I had to think about a different way of researching, because when I looked at students talk, I, as an analyst, was writing down in my field notes. I would describe the students. I would describe, their gender presentation, my perceptions of their racial identity. I would describe the clothing that they wore, hairstyle. But then I was like, but I couldn't say, oh, people are talking this way because they're seeing these things. I couldn't say what they were seeing unless they somehow talked about it in some way. And so signs of disability emerged as I started thinking about, well, how do I think about the surround and the material world that we are always navigating and that are absolutely integral to the interactions that we have. And so signs of disability really moved away from the focus on interaction, although it's still very interactional, and start thinking about how context, environment, material artifacts, all of these things are participating in the way that we talk, the way that we interact with each other. So in the writing center context, I was naming, so in my talk, I talked a lot about different spaces in the writing center, different ways that signs of disability might come up. I talked a little bit about, for example, when you show up and you see what your appointments are, you're already taking in information and you're working to look for information that you think is going to be relevant or helpful to you to navigate that upcoming conferences, the ones that you have coming up. I don't know what you can see in your appointment interface, but whatever it is, how you use it, what do you pay attention to, what do you look for? What aspects of your environment are you noticing or feeling and using not just visual input, but sound and smells and even emotional sensory input of all kinds is always kind of influencing what it is that we are, how we are orienting to a space, how we are navigating that space, how we are interpreting that space. Anyway, so I won't go on for too long, but I want to just name a few other spaces. So thinking about online tutorials and how we've had to modify or shift some of our practices. Thinking about the typical interactions that we have and how we might have scripts or a standard or expected ideas about how something is going to unfold and that we draw on, and how we respond when things go off script in a way. Thinking about the physical arrangement of furniture, thinking about the resources that are available to you, thinking about the approach to tutor training and to ongoing professional development. There's a whole wide range of different spaces and environments where signs of disability might come up. This idea that disability is something that we are paying attention to, that is expected, that is part of the conversation in this space. And accessibility is a big part of it's probably one of the most common, most obvious ways that disability gets pointed to in talking about accessibility, but it's not always just about access, right? Like sometimes it's just about being recognized or having strategy to talk about challenges that come up or you know, anyway, I'm gonna stop rambling for a minute, but is there anything that anyone wants to kind of add that maybe was important to the talk yesterday that you want to have at the ground floor for today's workshop? I'm seeing in the chat a couple of comments, and if it's okay, I'm going to read aloud comments. If you would prefer that your chat comments not be read aloud, I will absolutely respect that. But my sense is that I can't always predict who is able to follow the chat or who finds the chat distracting or difficult. So I will revoice those comments. So Jacob said, I love that we are always finding and redefining ways to help students through what we learn in classes, lectures, and life experiences. And Lindsay said, for me, something I love and that I've learned is that I can help students have a voice. Beyond that too, as a queer person and an autistic person, I feel like I can help students who have similar identities to mine just by being a person with said identities in the writing center space. And Trixie and Karen both echo Lindsay's comment. So any other thoughts or additions about yesterday's presentation before we move on down the agenda line?
And Christine, interpreter, would like to just kind of add a note that when you guys, since this is interactive, and when you guys jump in and add your comments, it would be helpful to the interpreters if you would identify yourself. Sometimes the Zoom isn't always showing me who's talking. So if you wouldn't mind just saying your name before you make your comment. Thank you.
Thank you so much for mentioning that, Christine. That's also helpful to me as well. So very appreciative. And you're welcome, anyone is welcome to name access moves that would be helpful, especially because I'm, sort of running this meeting, but there may be things that are customary or that you've come to expect in these meetings at Michigan State that maybe I'm not doing. I'm glad to be suggested to start doing them. Okay. Feel free to jump in at any time in the chat or, to unmute, but let me just kind of give you a free write. I love doing free writes. I think it's so great to just kind of have a moment to collect your thoughts. And I would like to ask you, and this is on the agenda, so if you're looking at it, it's item number 3. I'll give you about 5 minutes, but I'll check in. And if people want a few more minutes, just say yes in the chat and I will extend it to 7 minutes. But what are the primary areas of challenge or issues that you've noticed in the Michigan State context, writing center context, where disability is concerned? And I start with challenges or issues, not because I think disability is a challenge or an issue, but because I'm interested in thinking about where do you want to go from here? What are the positive or productive areas where you want to see change? moving forward. And it's perfectly okay for you to just kind of start with noticing. What are you noticing about disability if you're not cued into specific challenges? So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes. I'll set a timer on my end. Feel free to do this in any way that is comfortable for you. You can write on a notebook. You can type on a computer or a tablet. You can voice record a note on your phone. You can draw a picture, sketch, doodle, really anything. Any way this works for you. Setting a timer now and muting myself. It's been 5 minutes. Do you feel like you'd like another minute or two? I see someone asking for another minute, so I will set another 2-minute timer. In the middle of something and you want to finish getting a thought out, please keep 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 going with that. But I do want to give us a chance to kind of talk a little bit about what came up. And I am wondering, because I had originally thought, let's have a full group, and then I want to give you some significant time in smaller breakouts in the second half of the meeting. But I wonder if it would help to talk a little bit about this first in smaller breakouts. If I put in groups, if I make breakout groups of about 5 or 6 people, just to give you a chance to kind of start a conversation, sort of peer review the things that you would like to bring up to the fellow group. And so collectively as a group, you might just kind of talk a little bit about what you think would be important for the group as a whole to talk more about. So I think I'm going to go ahead and do that. So be prepared to be moved into a breakout room. Or I don't think I can do it. Karen, do you think you might be able to make breakout rooms?
Sure. How many rooms would you like? There are 53 folks. How many people do you want in a room?
I was thinking, yeah, I was thinking if you could put about 5 or 6 people in a group and just give them a chance to talk about the freeway. Just what came up for you, what, and getting a sense from the group what collectively they feel is important to come back to the full group to talk about.
Sure. And how long would you like us to stay in the breakout room so I know when to end them in case I'm away from you during this time in a breakout group?
5, 7 minutes. It does not need to be long at all. And then I want to come back. And I want to be able to hear from folks, but I'm feeling like some priming with the conversation will be useful.
Sure. Okay.
I'm back, Karen. I don't know if you want to call folks back.
Yeah, I just closed the breakout rooms when I saw you re-emerge. So folks are trickling back in now.
Welcome back. It looks like just about everyone is back. I'd love to just have a full group conversation. And this is the type of conversation where I think it's really helpful for people to record just maybe some notes to observations about what people are naming, what is coming up as challenges that are important for the MSU Writing Center context. So if one of you or several of you want to hop in the Google Doc and be recorded, just naming what you hear people talking about, that would be fantastic. So let me know what came up.
This is EJ talking. I will share some of the notes that I took from our group conversation. We mentioned having ASL interpreters at our consultations available all the time, having the live transcript option of Zoom be a conversation we have about online sessions, backtracking and making our current materials accessible and trainings for moving forward with creating those new materials, and then also pedagogical practices that we use in consultations, checking in, making sure they're useful for clients, and then thinking about returning to campus, rethinking how our space is accessible or inaccessible for clients and consultants.
So one of the things that I'm hearing in this comment is just really building strong accessibility principles and practices into the everyday parts of the center. So when you have a big group staff meeting like this, really thinking about what are the guidelines that are important for this meeting context for us to sort of build in as expectations. I have really loved that, right? I think one challenge, and this is something that comes up for ASL interpreting and captioning in particular, is resource scarcity and the fact that, my experience with ASL interpreting is that it's hard to find the right interpreters and enough of them, so there's not a specific deaf person who needs ASL interpreting. That might not be something that you build in. And then I see Amanda added in the chat the concern about money, which is really important here too. Having funding, and this comes up all the time, right? About what kinds of access cost money, what kinds of access can we build in that kind of cost neutral or can just be a part of our regular practice. And then Karen mentioned in the chat, is there any such thing as like an automatic virtual simulation of ASL, like a real-time simulated interpreter? I'm sure it wouldn't be as good as a live human with expertise, but I wonder if it is. I do not know if AI interpreting is this. AI captioning does. And there are really good and useful, productive conversations to have about the automatic captioning that's built into Zoom and captioning that's being performed by a captioner like we have today. And one of the challenges is for the automated captioning. So my voice is somewhat non-standard. I can't really describe it for you. Those of you who can hear me probably can tell that I sound a little bit different. And that comes up in the captioning ability, or inability actually, to correctly understand what I'm saying. And this happened for lots of people with accented voices, with non-standard, and I put that in quotation marks because standard is itself a construction of biases, of racism, of kind of expectations of what people should sound like. And those biases get built into the AI interfaces in ways that can be reinforcing of oppression rather than helping. So there's very complicated access questions that come up, and they're very important, which is why you want them to be something that people can ask about and talk about, but not necessarily turning into a checklist that, okay, we're always going to do this. Because maybe whatever this line item is doesn't work for someone. And that needs to become part of a more complicated conversation. And Tina mentioned in the comment whether students can request interpreters to come to sessions through disability services, and multiple people have said yes. And that's very common, right? That interpreters are available for students. It's less common that they would be available for the community. So I don't know how that gets resolved, because Karen mentioned at the very beginning of our meeting that one of her values is connecting to the broader community and not just the Michigan State bubble. So that question of accessibility and resource provision for people outside of the expected audience of students for the Disability Resource Center would be important. I would say that also there's a conversation in the chat about length of time and expectations for interpreting. And again, it really does vary, but I generally try to make requests at least 2 weeks in advance. And timing is something that comes up a lot when we start thinking about disability. You start thinking about the length, the time it might take to navigate. The breakout group that I dropped on earlier brought up the complexity of making appointments online, right? And sort of how to walk people through what can be a quite multi-step process of logging in, and I don't know what it involves, but going to this website, filling in this form, clicking here, clicking submit, and that can get exacerbated if appointment timelines need to be set, plus coordinated with access providers. Karen mentioned in the chat about amending our intake form to ask about access needs. I love that idea. And then another thing that I'm wondering about is whether people who work in the center talk about their own access needs, whether that's a conversation that is happening among folks who work here, that you all have needs, you all have things that affect your ability to be fully present and actively participating in a writing center tutorial or interacting with colleagues. How did the environment, how comfortable do you feel asking for changes in how things are done? You don't have to answer that question. I'm just naming things, right? What else came up in your small groups?
This is Trixie. One of the things we talked about was about training for our staff in all of these things that we're talking about, so that the staff feel comfortable in interacting with students in a variety of ways and talking to them about what they need, what their learning style is, what they need in the moment. And for me, also related to this is about how we share this information, like how students, faculty, staff who need things from us, who want things from us, or things that we're already just providing, just making sure people know that those things exist and that they're there for them. Or if, we've talked about, for example, labeling which of our 10 facilities are more accessible than others. So just being very upfront and clear about like, going to this hall will work for you. Going to this one is probably not a good plan. So just being very upfront about that and acknowledging that and what we have to offer and, you know, what we don't, so that we can know what we need to work on and what someone might need that we need to think about.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that. And I'm thinking about how information gets communicated in all of these ways. So, for example, labeling your facility, already there's a whole bunch of complications there. What things are you going to mention? What kind of information will be made available? How will people find this information? There's already a lot of information on the website. But when I go to your website, it's very text heavy. There's a lot of stuff to read. I personally like this because I read everything. There's a lot of people out there who will see all these words, and it's like, oh, there's a lot of words here. Which ones are important, right? And so I'm thinking about where that would go. How would I know that I could find that? How would I know that? And people who are used to looking for this, right? So if I'm in a wheelchair, I know that I'm not getting into a building if it's not accessible. So I'm checking before I just, kind of haul myself over there. And the same thing for me as a deaf person. I don't just kind of assume that I'm going to go to a Zoom webinar. I got to make sure that there's some kind of access set up. And then there's I'm sure it's not going to be accessible. So I'm not even looking. I don't know how much people expect to be looking or are primed to be thinking about that. So I think those are great questions. And one of the things that I hope that all of you will be thinking about in this meeting is what are the priorities. So you'll see at the end of this meeting, I've got some time set aside for that, but we're looking ahead to, okay, as a group, you're hearing people name things, there are things that you can move on, and there might be immediate, wow, this is a problem, this is totally inaccessible, we cannot keep doing this, that's urgent. And then there might be longer term, okay, we've got to really think this through and plan how we do this and put this in place in a way that's not going to create more challenges. And I'm also thinking about resources for professional development, which is I think what you mentioned at the very beginning of your comment. So thinking about how conversations about disability are always really intersectional so that we're not just kind of thinking about disabled students as the group, right? And that people with disabilities are doing the work of figuring out what works and how they're seen as experts rather than the people that need help or are always being helped. Now I'm finding myself rambling a little bit, and I see in the chat Karen has added how we represent these services or market them by capitalism word is important. Yeah, I know that, but I like to narrate the chat. And that was a response to Trixie's comment. I see that the captions are having a hard time with what I'm saying, so I want to make sure I'm being clear. So please let me know if I should talk more slowly. I think this is a good moment to transition, and I built in a break because I find 2 hours to be a long time to be staring at my Zoom screen. Are you comfortable kind of taking a break for about 10, let's say 10 minutes. Walking around your home, stepping outside if it's a nice day, soaking up a tiny bit of sun if there's a break in the clouds. Oh, okay. I was told 2:30 to 4:30, so thank you for that. I had planned 2 hours. So maybe no break? Do you typically break?
Not usually, but we can do whatever you would like to do. We can do a 3-minute break, something like that.
Yeah, let's do 3 minutes. And I just kind of stretch and, not be sitting in a chair, be in a different position for 3 minutes.
All right, everyone, it's 3:30 now. At 3:33, we will begin anew. And back to, I'm guessing folks will be trickling in, so we can probably continue as they're all kind of recongregating.
Awesome. I see that Amanda and Chris got more coffee. Yay. I will take another sip of water. All right. So my hope for today, I know that this is not a conversation that will finish, but my hope is that people might be able to name, specific, priority action items, next steps, ways that things that you might do individually, but also collectively, because some of what we do can involve being, individually upfront about what we need, practicing various accessibility strategies. But I also don't want this to be something that any one person sees as solely their responsibility, or that you see as happening on your own without being part of a larger collective mission. So I would love to kind of give you a chance in that Google Doc. If you can see it, I had thought that I would give you a chance in breakout room to have more specific targeted conversation on the 5 kind of areas there that I put there. But they've already come up in various forms, and I'm more interested in hearing from you more about the kind of actions that you would like to see, or topics that you feel like, okay, we need to build more something related to this into our practice. And you might also connect this with, you've been listening to different speakers throughout the semester. So this is not just about this one, my talk yesterday, but how the different conversations that you've been hearing have been coming together, and possibly suggesting to you where you want to take this. So I think I'm going to keep us in this larger room, but I would like to really invite specific note takers to write down in that space for notes and action items. If anybody want to volunteer, it would be great to have multiple volunteers. I see in the chat, a few people have volunteered. Great. Thank you for that. And I think it will be really valuable to have a record of things that came up, and this is the brainstorming space. This is not a we're making final decisions, and anything that gets written down now needs to be put on someone's immediate to-do list. This is just a ideas that are coming to mind that we can sort of collectively write down. So what are some thoughts? What are some ideas that are coming up for you as areas of priority or things that you would like to see addressed and taken action on? I'm making slightly silly faces.
This is Amari. Something that I'm really excited about seeing us do and that we've already started to work on is thinking about how we can work on some of our media that we have and think about different ways that we can make those more accessible for people.
And can you maybe name some examples of what you mean by media that you think might be able to be more accessible?
Sure. So for instance, we have the speaker series listed on our website, which is really great, but I think maybe making our links more clear would be useful. Basically just covering all the bases, making sure we have alt text, clear directions, things like that.
So I'm hearing here both comments about accessibility, like web accessibility and sort of guidelines, and there are great guidelines for kind of thinking about the accessibility of that public facing website and what people find when they try to find out about the Writing Center. And then there's also the question of making accessibility visible or perceptible as something that the Writing Center is thinking about. And I'm looking in the chat, and Sarah mentioned that I'd love to see the changes that we mentioned earlier incorporated into the intake form and a menu of accessibility options for people. I'd also love to see us add some pictures and things of what a session actually looks like so people know how to navigate the actual physical space once they arrive at the center. And then I would add to this, thinking about the kinds of things that sometimes frustrate or prevent people from coming to the Writing Center are not just about physical accessibility, right? But they might be nervous, or they might have anxiety, or be concerned about, how will I talk to a tutor? What will that feel like or look like? So I think thinking about those kinds of barriers and what information can go into making some of that more predictable. I also want to note that Jennifer mentioned I would love to get some actionable training on how to work with disabled writers. I know disability is diverse and there's no one size fits all answer to anything, but it would be great to have some strategies, phrases, consulting moves, etc., that could be applied to our consulting practices. I think that's a great idea. And I think that it's the kind of thing where, like, I was prepared to come to this meeting and give you a spiel about how I am not an expert in all kinds of disabilities. And so I'm not going to be able to tell you, here's what you should do if fill in the blank. But I do think that there are general moves that are very important and that it is useful to know something about the kinds of challenges that might be common or expected. Some of these challenges overlap with challenges that everyone experiences, but some of them are more pronounced, or they might need different kinds of responses. Um, and just to give you a general example of the kind of thing I mean, I have found that people sometimes assume because I'm deaf, I need ASL interpreting in all contexts. But in a one-on-one setting, I don't prefer to have an interpreter. I'm able to kind of navigate that by asking the other person to slow down, and it's easier to navigate that without an interpreter there than it is with. So I don't want people to assume what I need. I want them to ask me, and I want them to listen when I say, here's what I would like. And knowing something about the kinds of things that people might need makes you more prepared and more able to kind of respond when someone says, you know, do you think that we could sit on opposite sides of the table instead of next to each other? Because that will make it easier for me to see your face. A student might not feel comfortable saying, can I do that? But you, as the tutor, can say, would you rather sit side by side so we can look at the paper together? Or would it be easier if we sat on opposite sides of the table? So building a repertoire of possible ways that you can move, and then offering them and seeing if that sounds like something the person wants. And so I absolutely think that building that repertoire would be really great. I see that there's a bunch of chat comments here. There's a campus org called The Cube, helping to develop an accessibility plugin for the site. That's great. You need the people who know, right? Helping build that. And then Steph said, I'm looking forward to the training and full rollout of our asynchronous session. So thinking about different kinds of tutorials, right? Like how they work. We have a lot of beliefs about what works best, but what works best for most people doesn't work at all for some people, right? And rather than saying, oh, well, those people don't get to benefit from the center, what if we build some other ways of moving and we think about what works in those spaces and how we can do it. And Karen said we're collaborating with RCPD, the Campus Disability Office, to develop just that kind of training, which again, I love that, right? You guys are already doing a lot of the work and you're really wanting to kind of keep building on this expertise. How does it become available not just to this cohort of writing center staff, right, who have been part of the speaker series and having all of these conversations, but become something that is built in for future new tutors and new staff members. Alex said, don't assume, ask me. That's powerful. Aligns with the comment about intake and option. Absolutely. Like if people see that the writing center, the space that is already thinking about this, then that makes it more possible for someone to say, okay, I think that these are people that I can have a conversation about what I need with. Same goes for tutors. I have found that there's often an assumption that to be a really good writer or to be, in charge, like teaching in the classroom or being the tutor, that you have to know and that you have to have all the answers and that you have to be the one who can be super flexible and not have need. And that's been something that I've had to push against in my own practice, right? To not sort of assume that, okay, I can understand what's happening in the multimodal project, but I will just do my best and I will offer to bring an interpreter and to try to, I mean, there's like all kinds of ways that I kind of assumed that I had to do the work rather than seeing this as a space where I could ask for what I needed and negotiate that. All right, I'm going to read another chat comment. Karen said, one really exciting thing we've been working on to share this message and our work sustainably is our accessibility committee's work on accessible composing, finding ways to make all composition, whether in text or multimedia, accessible. We have several dozen requests from other institutions to share information and provide training for their centers on these practices, which is so cool. And it speaks to the incredible work of the students on the accessibility committee. And that makes me think the accessibility committee might already have a big, long list of fantastic action items. I'm really curious about online instruction and how tutors are finding their own needs being met. In the breakout room that I overheard, there were different responses to that, right? Where some people found them less accessible, less easy, and others found them more accessible. And so I wonder how much of the conversation about accessibility had dealt with thinking about what tutors need.
This is EJ talking. One of the things that we mentioned in our breakout room was the fact that when we do online, or personally, when I do online consultations in the context of a writing center where other conversations are happening and things are going on, it is easier for me to be distracted and kind of pulled away from the online consultation. So we talked a little bit about ways that we could make that more accessible for consultants as well.
That's really powerful. Thinking about distraction and attention and how that gets navigated. How are you fully present in an online space when you have 10 web browsers open and different things might be happening that are just very slightly off screen, right? Like you can see that very small window of my office, but you don't know what's happening over there. Amanda said, I honestly think the accessibility series this semester has really opened up the conversation and given consultants a more comfortable space to vocalize their needs.
Hi, my name is Karina. And I actually, in our small groups, I was talking about how I deal a lot with chronic fatigue. And so online sessions or virtual sessions for me are a lot easier because I don't have to worry about whether or not I'll be able to make the walk back to my car after a shift. Um, but yeah, I actually, EJ, that's a really great point. I hadn't thought about how distracted I am during those sessions as well because everything is kind of on screen.
And I want to add to this about to that really important point about online being less fatiguing because of the, like you can show up from home, just moving from the living room to your office or wherever your workspace is, without having to drive and walk across campus. And if Michigan State is anything like other large universities, most people can't park that close to their building. And that I really wonder, and I think another important conversation will be how much of the online consultation that you've been able to do will you be able to continue, and kind of continue to incorporate into your everyday writing center practice, so that people who need it, people who just aren't going to be able to show up to a physical location are going to get it. And I'm also wondering about the online availability of resources. So when I worked in the Writing Center as a graduate student, we had all kinds of handouts and materials, and we would always be like, I mean, this was a while ago, so I'm no spring chicken, but the we had a big file cabinet, right? And so if someone was working on something and was like, oh, we have a handout about that, we would go grab that handout. Are these handouts similarly available, easy to pull out, easy to point to and look at together? What are the things that you can do in an in-person session that are different online but might need to be reimagined or just done a little bit differently? We have about 5 minutes left. So this is an invitation for final word, and Trixie comments in the chat. We don't know what all of our various spaces will look like moving forward, but we have already argued to the higher ups that we definitely cannot go back to the low numbers of online sessions. Students just won't allow it, and rightly so. Yeah, and that's actually something that I'm talking about with the University of Washington. I'm moving institutions, and one of the things that the university, the department has already been talking about is the importance of having hybrid faculty meetings moving forward, so that faculty can, there will be an in-person meeting, but there will still be an online element for those who can't physically be at the meeting that day. And so that's something that I'm excited about. I'm excited to think about how that opens up possibilities, even as it makes things complicated for a while too. Other final thoughts, additional items that haven't come up?
This is Monique. In our group, we had talked about the sensory environment in our main site in Bessie Hall, also the satellite sites, and how they are designed to be very collaborative and open, and that lends itself to an open concept design. However, when you have so many people in little pods in one room, it can get quite loud as far as people talking over each other. And I think it was Amanda had mentioned that there's not necessarily an affordability of having an individual room in the Bessie site as far as having a private low sensory load space for people to have a one-on-one consultation. So that's something we had talked about in our group. I know that real estate is a premium at many institutions, but an action point could be to take a look at our current spaces. Are there some additional space that we can acquire or current space that we can refit to allow for low sensory private consultation spaces?
I think that's a really great idea. And there's all kinds of possibilities here, right? You could have low density hours, maybe, where there are fewer appointments scheduled, so it's less likely to be crowded. I'm just brainstorming. I'm not saying that's a great idea. I'm just kind of thinking about, when you can kind of configure possibilities around time and space, knowing that there's not going to be a perfect. Great, this is the solution. We have now solved the accessibility challenges that come with crowded, busy, university environments. I think that's actually a really nice way to conclude. And I'm noticing that there's 1 minute left, and I think that folks have been sharing really, really great ideas. I took a peek at the Google Doc, and there's a fantastic list there, and I hope that you will continue to build on it. I hope that there will be space for you to kind of name challenges, name problems, notice the issues, and build both what can we do now and what do we need to build toward and work toward to think about accessibility and disability across all aspects of our writing center space.
This is Karen speaking. I just wanted to thank you again, Stephanie, for joining us this afternoon. This was amazing, and we generated so much good conversation and so much work for us all to do. So look forward to summer projects, Writing Center staff, since a lot of what we discussed today will be stuff we're going to be working to implement. Some of it's already in the works. But this was such a great conversation to get folks moving from that sort of thinking space to that acting space, right? Moving into how we actually make access moves and start doing this work more concretely. So thank you for your lecture this week. Thank you for your time this afternoon. We are so grateful to have spent this time with you. And yeah, just thank you so, so much.
Thank you for having me, and thank you to both of the interpreters and to the captioner. I'm really grateful to all of you for being here too. Bye.
All right, everybody. Have a great afternoon and a great weekend. Take care.